Hi again, everyone. I'm Ollie Matthews. This is Refuge from Narcissism, and this refugee video is sponsored by contribution from Tanya. And this is Tanya from her last video was the narcissist jealousy is what fuels their contempt for you. And here is her story. Hi, Ollie. Tanya here with another story. This story is about my borderline little sister, Katie. When I was 24 years old and Katie was 12 years old, our family moved down south together. You moved with your family at 24, huh? It's not a good move. It's never a good move. It was my parents, my two sisters, and me. My brothers were smart and stayed back in upstate New York, like you should have. Before we moved, my parents had talked about moving for 5 years. When Holly and I saw no developments on the move, we decided we would get an apartment together since it was cramped at my parents' house. I guess Holly's your other sister? Once my mom learned about this plan, she panicked. During our appointment looking at an apartment, my mom called Holly and told her to cancel our apartment search since we were for sure moving. Once my mom saw my sister and I wanted to gain our independence, she was quick to shut down our plan. My parents bought a new home under new construction. Once it was built, they moved with Katie, and then I moved in the summer and Holly moved in the fall. While I experienced NPD abuse all my life, it was never as targeted as when I became isolated with my abuser in a new state. Growing up, I was active in sports, work, and social life. While my mom was abusive, she also worked and had 5 kids with my dad. I was never home and had friends and activities that kept me busy. Once we moved to a new state, the dynamic shifted, and it was my parents, my 2 sisters, and me. My dad was always traveling, and when he was home, he was not present. Much like growing up, he was there but not there. During college, Holly and my mom got really close. While I experienced triangulation when we were still living in New York and them ganging up on me, I still believed Holly was my best friend. For the next 4 years, I had the most isolating, abusive years of my life. My mom had less things to focus on, so I became a prime target. Holly also started exhibiting what I know now to be covert narcissistic traits. We were never allowed to talk about the family, especially in the Ukrainian community, where gossip is rampant. So I had no one to talk to about what was happening to me. When we were still living in New York, Holly and I had a mutual friend while we were still living in New York, Holly and I had a mutual friend we traveled with who lived in Florida. This friend and I got really close, and I decided to confide in her about Holly and my mom were treating me. Always a bad move. It's unfortunate. This is the problem women have. Women stab each other in the back constantly. Let's see. A few weeks later, when Holly instigated another fight, she blurted out that our Florida friend had told her everything I had said. Of course she did. This is what women do to each other. This is what women do to each other. I was so hurt and called my Florida friend and ended our friendship. Later, Holly discarded this Florida friend. The Florida friend sent me a sweet card apologizing for betraying me and telling me she learned who Holly really was. This should have been a big warning flag, but I always forgave. I really don't want to put down Christianity, but I do believe the narcissist uses it to their advantage. I often forgave my abuse to keep peace and allowed my abusers in my life, my mom and Holly. If anyone talks about forgiveness and they're a narcissist, I want to remind you that God went no contact with Satan. They don't teach that enough. You can forgive someone, but you also have the right to cut them out. 4 years of living down south, my parents would eventually move back to New York with Katie when she was 16. Since we moved to the south when Katie was 12, and I had been like her third parent growing up, I was hurt when she had sort of rebelled against me the year prior and went behind my back and asked Holly to take her shopping. You see, here's more of this competition. There's more of this competition. We've talked about this competition in other videos of yours too. Since I was more of a parent figure, you see, here's the problem with this, Tanya. You're not a parent. You're viewing yourself as a parent figure. And your parent should have never let you be put in that position, because the reality is you might be a parent figure, but you're not a parent. You're not a parent. You're not her parent. You're her sister. I mean, 12 years difference. You're not really old. I mean, technically, I guess you'd be old enough to be her mother, but come on. Since I was more of a parent figure, having helped raise her, I think it was natural to rebel against me. We're just sisters fight. Sisters also fight, clearly. Like, you don't necessarily need to say, like, why is a 16-year-old, who at this point, you're 28, she's 16, what's she rebelling against? She's rebelling against you at this point. I mean, you shouldn't be at that point that involved in a 16-year-old's life if you're 28. You should be living your own life. She saw Holly as more of a sister despite being 14 years older. So Holly's your older sister. I don't know. It's just how the triangulation works sometimes. Like, there's always going to be an odd sister out. You don't have to say, well, it's because she sees me as a mother figure and her as a sister figure. No, this is how the competition works. This is what the borderline sets up between her daughters. And the fact that your brothers stayed back in New York, for those 4 years, I mean, that's very telling. That's very telling. I have very limited memories during these 4 years. I try so hard to remember, but honestly, my brain is not allowing me since it was so traumatic. One memory I have is probably a year after we moved, and Katie was 13 by then. She was more rebellious and started talking back to my mom. Katie was being a teenager. I noticed my mom started to apply the same abuse tactics on Katie that she used on me. Katie knew I was compassionate and she could feel safe with me, so she confided in me about how Mom was treating her. Not wanting Katie to suffer, I gave her advice and told her I thought it was wrong how Mom was treating her. I told her I was being mistreated too. I think Katie saw how I was being mistreated, and that is why she came to me. What happened next is still uncertain. A few weeks later, after another blowout fight with me and my mom, she confronted me about Katie. Your mother did. She accused me of trying to alienate her and demonize her as a mother. Confused, I asked her what she was talking about. My mom said, I heard you warning Katie about me. I remember the room spinning. This was a private conversation. How could my mom have possibly heard? And I remember my mom and Holly were not at home at the time. Years later, I came to realize Katie betrayed me. Of course, because you're not realizing that you're thinking you're some kind of parental figure to Katie. Okay? And all this is 3 sisters competing against each other. 3 sisters competing against each other, all at the behest of the borderline mother. This is exactly how my mother and her 2 sisters interacted with each other. Okay? And my mother saw herself as almost some kind of parental figure over her younger sister, Jenny. And you can see the dynamic with the middle sister Barbara playing the two off the one, and then you can interchange these. And then you throw in my grandmother Virginia into it, and you got a fucking shitstorm. Understand something about your mother, okay? Understand something about your mother. She is a borderline woman. She is constantly pumping for fucking information. So whether Katie readily gave it up or your mother is a master manipulator to get the information she wants, okay, doesn't really matter at this point, because the source of all the issues continues to be your mother. Your mother. You see yourself as a parental figure over Katie. You're not. Tanya, you're not. You're still her sister. And the fact that Holly's 2 years older than you and you think she sees her more of a sister than you just tells you how fucked up your mother's got the three of your heads. It always bothers me when a sibling is like, well, I was like the mother. And I understand a lot of times you do get stuck doing a lot of the parental responsibilities. But biologically and mentally, you know that's not your mother. That is your sister. And this is just another three-way sister fight when you got three sisters and a borderline mother, man. And this is what this is what I grew up with. My father's side of this family, the same thing. Three sisters constantly triangulating. It was my father's sister, and I've talked about it, my father's sister, the middle sister, Lita, was the one who figured this out decades ago when she went no contact with everybody. She knew it. She knew there was something wrong. And they all called her crazy, and she's got problems, and she had brain tumor, and that's what's caused. No. And it wasn't until years later that I put it all together. I'm like, this is what happened. And both times, just like with you, Tanya. Okay, my father's side, 5 kids. The oldest 2 were boys. My father and my Uncle Kenny, and then the youngest 3 were girls. Okay? And my mother has just three sisters. The age gap between the oldest and the youngest were the same, like 10, 15, 12, 15 years. So at both times it sets up that older sibling, younger sibling parental dynamic that isn't fucking real. I specifically remember Ginny saying to my mother, "You're not my mother. You're not my mother." Same thing Tina would say to Adrian. "You're not my mother. You're not Lucy." This is the fucked up dynamic they set up. Years later, I came to realize Katie betrayed me. Okay? And understand, she's 16 at the time. 16. You're holding her at 16 after decades of abuse with a seasoned borderline narcissist from the old Soviet bloc, okay? You're saying you betrayed me at 16? I'm not saying Katie hasn't turned into a borderline and she isn't a problem here, okay? But this is not her fault. This is on your mother. This is all on your mother. You know, a lot of this gets focused, like when I talk about the women destroying their daughters, borderline, a lot of it gets focused on the black community because, I mean, it is prevalent there. But this happened, the reason I know so much about this is because this is what I lived myself. on both sides of the family. And this is what I'm talking about these mothers who destroy their daughters with this fucking conflict. And they're like carbon copies of each other. The dynamics, the ages, all of it. Years later, I came to realize Katie betrayed me. She needed a trophy to prove to my mom that she could be loyal and join the alliance of my mom and Holly. Right, at 16, like what? Would she wants to go fight that at 16? And that is exactly what happened. It went from 2-on-1 to 3-on-1. Despite this, I still doted on Katie and tried to ignore the new chill in the air. Katie got so brazen after a few years later that she confronted me in the large bathroom the girls shared. She started to physically corner me and threatening to hit me. I have to remind you that we are not a ghetto family, but she was acting very ghetto. Katie thought because I was the scapegoat, it's funny, like, because I just said this is what happens in the black community. And this is where, you know, Katie thought because I was the scapegoat, she could treat me any way she wanted. I had enough. After she pushed me, I grabbed her and pinned her up against the wall. I was 5'1" and she was 5'4", but she didn't know how strong I was, even though I was petite. I pinned her against the wall and told her, "You want to hit me?" She couldn't break free because she was not strong enough. Finally, the brat burst into tears. "Well, Tanya, you're 28 years old. She's 16. 16. I mean, her emotions, her hormones, her everything. Your mother in her head, you're blaming her at 16 and you're 28. Why are you still in the house at that point?" See, the fact that you're still there and you haven't gone out on your own at this point is a bigger part of the problem. Why are you there in the first place? Because of your mother. And you're blaming all this on a 16-year-old. Finally, the brat burst into tears. That is when my borderline mom ran in to save her little lamb from me. Because she's the cause of all of it. Don't you get it? Your mother was there the whole time. Who's really to blame here? Your 16-year-old sister or your fucking mother? Who let it go that far in the first place? Why? Because she wants her fucking daughters at each other's fucking throats and blaming each other. When you should be blaming her. It's all on her. Before that, she could clearly hear her threatening me and did nothing. They will always have each other's backs. The living room was their headquarters. Each night I got home from work, it was my mom, Holly, and Katie sitting together. Since our relationship was strained, I was not free to sit with them, nor do I think I was welcome. I had a challenging corporate finance job, so there was no safety at work or home for me. So why are you living there at 28 years old, putting up with this? Why? I got so depressed that I would purposely get home at 7 p.m. to avoid them. Once I got home and saw them in the living room, I would walk past them and go upstairs without saying anything. I'd walk right into my bedroom, close the door, and go to sleep. After weeks of this, they suddenly got concerned. I heard them ask each other, "Something's wrong with Tanya." None of them ever approached me or asked me what was wrong because they already knew. Their goal was to strip any confidence or self-worth I had. After my parents moved back to New York with Katie in 2010, I was numb. I was numb and in shatters. I was left alone with Holly, who used to be my best friend. Holly bought a condo that year and told me I was never welcome to live with her and to not even think about it. Not that I wanted to. If it were me, I would have done anything for my siblings. I got an awesome apartment, which you should have done years prior. Holly was quick to stay with me for a week after her neighbor died of suspicious circumstances and she was scared to go back. Our relationship was almost non-existent. When she decided she wanted to see me, we would hang out. Otherwise, she would give me the silent treatment for weeks. Holly still joined me on a couple trips with my friends. This is kind of how Ginny would treat my mother. This is exactly how Ginny and Barbara would treat actually, they both would treat my mother like this. You know, you couldn't get a hold of Ginny. She didn't want anything to do with it, do with you unless, you know, it was something she wanted at that point. It was quite amusing. But they always could come down to the shore house, right? That they had no problem doing. Oh. She did encourage me to host a 30th birthday party for myself a few years later. It had been years by then that I was pretending to be happy. I had depression but was functioning. I got a new job during this 3-year period and even won the President's Award at work. I isolated myself and had no desire to go to church. I didn't want to pretend to be happy. Holly was still an active churchgoer. She accused me of abandoning her and that she was forced to go to church by herself. She never asked me why I stopped going to church. Years later, when I moved back to New York and visited my sister for her MBA graduation, I suggested we attend my church, my old church. She still attended. She snapped back with, "Why would we go? It's not like you went to church anyway." I called her out and told her it was a harsh thing to say. After 7 years of living down south, 4 of them with my parents and sisters and 3 of them with Holly, with Holly only, I had no support. I took stock of my life and didn't want to be connected with a sister who was so disloyal and cold. So I thought back to the last time I was happy, and that was when I was 24 and before I moved. So I moved back to my hometown in New York. Another mistake because my mom's reign of terror resumed. I had been back in New York for a couple years. Katie was 22 years old now, and I was 34. Months earlier, I lent her my townhouse to host a birthday party so she could be free to celebrate without my parents. I told her she could have it until midnight, and I had my own movie night at my brother's house. I came home around midnight, and of course her party was still going strong. I talked to her friends for a couple minutes and went to bed. Katie became secretive like Holly, but I spotted a guy who I thought was her boyfriend. It was ridiculous that she wouldn't tell me. Not only did I decorate for her party, I went to a special bakery and got her a gluten-free cake and even ordered a step and repeat. Despite my best efforts to fall asleep at 3 a.m., most of them were still there, so I decided to join them and we had a good chat. Finally her friends left at 4 a.m. Once it was just me and Katie, I asked her normal things of how she liked the party. She mentioned that her best friend only stopped by for a short time earlier, and Katie seemed upset by this. Sensing she wanted to talk about it, I asked her about it. As soon as I did, Katie flipped a switch and made accusations saying, "All you do is gossip and cause drama." Then she moved into other accusations. I told her to stop and tried to explain that I thought she was upset. Understand something. Katie resents the shit out of you. She resents the shit out of you the same way Ginny resented my mother and Barbara. My mother resented Barbara and Ginny, and they all resent each other. Same thing with my father's sisters. This is resentment. This is childhood resentment because she hasn't dealt with the shit her mother put you people through. She views any questions you ask her as parental nagging. Okay? And you're not her mother. You're her sister. So that even irks her even more in that fucking reality. And it could be the most innocuous, innocent of your intents. It's too late, Tanya. It was too late. Your mother destroyed all of this. She then moved on to other accusations. I told her to stop and tried to explain that I thought she was upset. She went into a full narcissistic rage and started screaming. I told to stop and that I had neighbors and she was embarrassing. She continued. She finally packed up her stuff dramatically left. Her dramatic exits from my home would be a theme for the next several years. She was living with my parents by herself. She became my mom's target. She's the same one I wrote about that got attacked in 2019 at Thanksgiving by my mom and Holly. Katie was so used to me being the target that she unraveled and wanted me to fall on the sword for her that night, and I refused. The same night that Katie stood on a 6-story parking garage roof and was going to jump, she told me a few months later, but now that I know more about borderlines, I don't think she would actually have gone through with it. No, it's all histrionic bullshit. Even more so, the next month she spent Christmas with my mom. When I called Katie out a few months later, and told her she accepted crumbs from our mom, Katie, in a very Holly-like tone, said, "I've moved past it." I thought to myself, you moved past your mom treating you so badly you almost killed yourself. During that Thanksgiving night, when I tried to diffuse things, Katie snapped at me and said, "Shut up, Tanya, you're a joke. No one takes you seriously." Later that night, when I stayed to console her, "Why do you keep trying to console this person? She doesn't like you, Tanya. She doesn't like you. Just like my mother's sisters didn't like her, they don't like each other. Just like my father's sisters didn't like each other, she doesn't like you." Later that night, when I stayed to console her, she was adamant that if I stood up to Mom and Holly, that it would have taken a turn for the worse. Translation: Katie wanted me to be the fall guy and redirect their attack from her to me. Of course they do. After all, Katie set up that alliance with Holly and Mom 15 years prior and betrayed me in the process. She never thought they would turn on her, but Katie never calculated that Tanya would learn about narcissism, and even though she failed no contact in 2015, by 2019 she was gray rocking, so Katie became their new target. One last thing about Katie. A couple months after I let her have her birthday party at my townhouse, she was coming over for an early dinner. When she showed up, she was not alone. Her boyfriend was with her, although I was still in the dark about if they were dating. I had concluded as much. I did not know him, so instead of a casual dinner with my sister, I was not forced to entertain and be a hostess. I also had to make more food for the extra guests. We were having a nice chat when they watched me prepare dinner. We ate and everything was fine. Then I was clearing the dishes and he started asking me more questions. I thought it was a little odd. Then he asked me how old I was, and I told him 34. As soon as I said 34, he immediately said, "Ooh, I like older women. I've dated a woman who were 7 years older than me." I laughed nervously and looked at my sister. I had concluded he was 27, and I remembered Katie saying he was 5 years older than her. He was asking me more questions and seemed flirty. I wanted him to leave, but I didn't want to be rude. If my sister was smart, she would have found an excuse to leave. No, instead they just lingered. Not wanting to be a bad hostess, I suggested we watch TV. They agreed. Not knowing what shows they liked, I suggested Malcolm in the Middle since it was one of my favorites. I have a large couch and made sure to sit on the far end on the right side. Katie sat in the middle and her boyfriend sat on the far left of the couch. As we were watching the shows, we were all laughing. When another funny scene concluded, I turned my head to my sister with a laugh with her at a funny scene. Instead, I saw Katie glaring at me. I ignored her, and a few moments later, I looked again, and she was still glaring. I mouthed, "What?" to her, so her boyfriend wouldn't notice. She kept glaring. Then I turned my head to face the show again and suddenly got punched in the back of the head. She closed fist punched me as hard as she could. Stunned, I grabbed the back of my head at sudden pain. Immediately after punching me, Katie ran to my bedroom and slammed the door. I sat there in shock and the boyfriend looked nervously forward, pretending not to notice. I think he witnessed the entire thing. Katie returned a few moments later and told him they should leave. We awkwardly said goodbye. Months later, Katie accused me of hitting on her boyfriend. You just let her hit you in the fucking head and like... The coward that he is. Months later, Katie accused me of hitting on her boyfriend. The coward that he is, he told her how uncomfortable I made him. When Katie broke up with him a few years later, she told me he had been cheating on her most of their relationship, even with one of her best friends. Katie was so smart, she started dating his brother immediately afterward. Insert sarcasm. He got married last year, and Katie used it as an opportunity to shame me and also told me the girl he married was super skinny as a dig to me because I had gained weight. No matter what I told her, that he was the one flirting with me and that I did nothing wrong outside of being a hostess in my own home and being friendly to an uninvited guest. She would not accept the truth. When you think about it, when you compare a borderline to normal women, I'm sure most men would choose someone stable. But it was another example of how it's always my fault. She saw him asking for my age. Why do most men ask that? My mom and Holly competed with me when I became a young woman. I never thought my little sister, who I helped raise, would one day see me as competition. And being the borderline that she is, she got violent instead of covert like Holly. Thanks, Tanya. I mean, we've been talking about the competition in your family now for a while. But again, you continue having these people. None of this is going to change. Whether you're calling it gray rocking them, keeping them at a distance, low contact. This is not going to stop. This is not going to stop. It's not going to change. Why? Because this is the dynamic your mother has set up. Now, what Katie does now, she's responsible for. She's an adult. Okay? But you have been mixing it up with her since she's been 12 years old. And you're not her mother. You're her sister. And she knows that, and she resents that. And you know what the deal is? You all resent each other. Okay? And that's what happens. Okay? This is a decades-long resentment. A resentment all caused by your borderline mother. This is the dynamic the borderline mother sets up, that the sisters live in resentment of each other for life. Jealousy, resentment, it's all the same. She resents you. She resents you. You resent her. Holly resents you. She resents her. That's how it works. Even when they're sitting there plotting with each other, they're resenting each other. They know they're just doing it so they don't have to fight each other. They can have you as the target. Something in my eye. So, I hope that helps. Thank you so much for another contribution and story, Tanya. I really appreciate it. Thank you to everybody watching. Please leave any opinions or advice in the comment section below. And again, if you want your story read on the channel, you have a topic you'd like me to cover, something you'd like me to expose, you'd like to set up a Skype, phone call, have a private video made, you'd like to sponsor a video like this for someone who needs help and can't afford it, or you'd just like to make a contribution to the channel in general to keep it supported, growing, and successful, because this channel survives 100% on contributions from all of you. Without you guys, all of this goes away. So if you like what you see here and you want to see more videos like this, you know what to do with the PayPal and email links in the description box. Also, please like and share this video wherever you can. Subscribe to my channel on here and on Rumble, and be sure to click the subscription bell to be notified of all my video uploads. I'm Ollie Matthews. This has been Refuge from Narcissism. Take care, everybody.